All right, so this is our third and I think final work session for this morning on, we've had two prior on the November 6th. This is Parks and Lands Draft 2025-2030 work session on a capital improvement plan. Oh, so Ken, you're back. You booted Kevin. Put him to the second row. Go ahead and take it away.
Good morning, Chair Medved. My name is David Stipe. I'm the Parks Planning and Development Manager. With me this morning, unexpectedly,
I'm leaving for Kevin. I didn't realize he was right behind me.
Kevin wasn't planning on joining us. You can
Oh,
stay here.
sorry.
Just distinguished guest, Director. I'm a little bit thrown by having you here with me. Director Later, and our capital program specialist, Justin Morgan. In the room today, if you have questions about the Legacy Lands acquisition dollars in the Parks capital plan, is Kevin Tyler. This is a draft Parks capital plan because Parks and Lands have been separated into two divisions within Public Works. Next slide, please. So we develop a Parks capital plan because the Growth Management Act requires us to develop a plan and develop a capital facilities plan and a capital improvement plan. RCW 36.70 requires local entities, local governments to retain open space. There are a number of different vehicles that we can use to retain open space, one of which is the development of parks and recreation facilities, hence the Parks and Recreation Open Space Plan. So how do we develop our Parks and Recreation Open Space Plan? We went through a public process, and back in 2022, April of 2022, we adopted that plan. At that time, we also developed a capital improvement plan, and we adopted that plan as well. And at that time, the county decided that we would revise that plan annually. And so we've been doing that on an annual basis since that time. Next slide, please. So we go through a public process to update our capital improvement plan, and we generally start that in the second quarter of each year. And we develop that draft plan and take it to our Parks Advisory Board. And this year we took it to the Parks Advisory Board around July on the 9th. At that time, we also opened a public comment period that ran through August 6th. We took the information that we received from the Parks Advisory Board on that meeting on the 9th and the public feedback that we got in that 30-day public comment period, and we made some revisions to the draft plan, and we went back to the Parks Advisory Board to present the revised draft. We received some further feedback from them, and we've been working on the draft plan over the last several months, revising some numbers as we've received planning estimate revisions, cost estimate revisions through our planning and development process. And we're here today to present our draft plan to you in this work session with the ultimate goal of coming back on the 12th at a public hearing for adoption of our capital plan. Some notable changes in this draft capital plan. We have continued our shift from new park capital projects to a category that we developed in our last capital plan, the adopted 24 to 29 plan, from new park capital to stewardship capital projects. We developed that program last year, which is simply just new recreation amenities or accessibility improvements of existing recreation amenities in our existing parks. We've also reduced our reliance on REIT 2 funds to balance out with our other public works programs, our program partners, excuse me. And we've also we've increased our reliance on PIF funds for planning and development in recognition of that reduced reliance on REIT 2 funds. We've also shifted away from using PIF funds for acquisitions to using those PIF funds for property development to offset the reduction in REIT 2 fund utilization, and in recognition that we are slowing down new park development. We currently have 17 undeveloped parks. We're going to focus on stewardship capital and developing our undeveloped properties and slowing down our acquisition program, and we'll get into that a little bit later. We've also, in this capital plan, we've removed the preventative maintenance category from this CIP, but we have provided it in the appendices of this document for your reference. In the last 3 cycles of the capital plan that I've been involved with, we've included it as a category, but it's never been a capital expenditure. It was for reference only, and it was in the plan. We've just simply moved it back to the appendix. I think the larger objective of having it in the plan in the past was to just demonstrate that we continue to do preventative maintenance. And in this draft plan, we've also removed the equipment and vehicles category. The reason that it's been removed is in the last 3 plans, it was a category that was sort of a placeholder for the acquisition of equipment and vehicles that was never approved in the budget. And so in the last couple of cycles, and so we've just removed it from the plan for this go around. I'm going to hand this off to Justin to go through some comparison slides for the adopted versus proposed plans.
Oh, I didn't. No. Thank you, David. All right. I'm on slide 5. So this table is a comparison of the 2025 CIP funds by category in the 24 to 29 adopted parks CIP to the draft 2025 to 2030 parks CIP. Note in this slide that both preventative maintenance and the equipment and vehicles categories that David mentioned earlier have been removed from the draft CIP. There is a notable difference in the total budget for 2025, up from 21.5 million to just over 28.7 million. We will discuss that when we dig into the categories in the following slides. Next slide, please. This table is a comparison of the adopted CIP and the draft CIP we are discussing today. Also note that in this slide, both preventative maintenance and the equipment and vehicle categories have been removed from the draft CIP. This comparison is not quite apples to apples until you factor the preventative maintenance numbers into your analysis. Then we are around 74.5 million to 80.3 million when comparing the 2 capital plans. We will discuss some of the reasons for the funding differences as we dig into the categories on the following slides. Next slide, thank you. This slide summarizes the 6-year funding projection for the major maintenance program. Major maintenance projects are projects performed that prolong the life of existing assets that cost more than $50,000. These projects are primarily funded by REIT 2 dollars. This chart compares the adopted CIP to the draft CIP year over year with a 6-year total on the right. We've provided some notable projects in the bullets below. Among these are 2 vehicle bridges, one at Lacamas Regional Park and one at Louisville Regional Park. Both bridges are anticipated to be over $1 million in construction costs. The average annual major maintenance project funding sits at around $2.5 million. And over time, we hope to have the capacity to move that higher to around $3 to $3.5 million. Next slide. All right, so this slide, this is some progress photos of one of our current major maintenance projects. This is the Molten Falls Bridge renovation. This project has been in the works since an initial inspection in 2017 and will be wrapping up later this month. On the left in the foreground is the arch truss of the bridge before dry ice blasting, and in the left background is after blasting. The photo on the right is the same arch truss after blasting and refinishing with a stain product that will protect the wood against weathering due to the elements. Next slide. Here are more photos from the Molten Falls Bridge renovation project. On the left is the center truss steel bracket before cleaning and painting, and on the right is the finished result after cleaning and painting. Next slide. Another major maintenance project that we recently completed was the replacement of Field 4/5 at Luke Jensen Sports Park back in September. This is an artificial turf sports field utilized by both soccer and little leagues, as well as many community members. Prior to this replacement, the field was original to the development of the park back in 2012. The soccer and little league community have been loving the new surfacing, and we've received a lot of positive feedback. Next slide. We're also in the process of completing playground replacements at both Sifton and Geyser neighborhood parks. This is the start of an annual process of replacing 1 to 2 playgrounds per year as the playgrounds in our parks age out. This picture is the new structure at Geyser Neighborhood Park. It replaced an old play structure that dated to the early 90s. Again, we've already received many positive comments from community members who are eager to utilize the updated play equipment. With that, I'll hand things back over to David to take you through stewardship and new park capital projects, along with parks and legacy lands acquisitions. Thank you.
So as I mentioned earlier, we developed the category new stewardship capital development. And we have another comparison slide for you to consider. This slide compares the adopted versus draft capital plan for that stewardship capital program category. While the development of new recreation amenities at existing parks does increase our O&M needs, it does it at a lower rate because it doesn't add drive time. It doesn't create an entirely new park for our O&M staff to have to develop, to drive to maintain. Excuse me. So it's sort of a compromise. We can still strive to meet the growing recreation needs of the community without creating an outsized burden on our O&M teammates. So we've also provided some notable stewardship capital development projects in the bullets on this slide. Next slide, please. One of those is the Kleinline Pond Accessibility Improvements Project, where we received a State Department of Commerce grant of just over $1.3 million to make accessibility improvements at the site. This project includes access down to the water for folks with mobility issues. It also includes a replacement of the aging playground at this site with accessible surfacing, a replacement of an old and very finicky splash pad that is a real maintenance burden for our O&M staff. It also will include a flush toilet, a plumbed toilet out in the parking lot. So folks who come to use the Salmon Creek Greenway who have mobility issues don't have to cross the bridge and travel several hundred feet to the only plumbed restroom at the site. Next slide, please. This is a year-over-year comparison of the new capital development program, comparing the adopted plan versus the draft plan. Again, new capital is building new parks. You'll notice that in this comparison, we do still plan on building some new facilities. And in 25, we will be building Curtin Creek Community Park. And we will be making, I should mention, in our stewardship capital program, we will be making improvements to the Harmony Sports Complex. Chair Medved, you mentioned the difficulties in getting out onto 190 seconds when there's a soccer game letting out. So there will be a light at 13th, and I'm sure we can discuss that when we take questions. But in the case of our new capital development, we will be building a new community park at Curtin Creek. And in 25 or in 26 and in 27, we will be developing a new neighborhood park at Minnehaha, at the Minnehaha property. I'll share a slide here in a minute of that master plan, that draft master plan, and a new neighborhood park at the Mount Vista property in sort of the northeast urban growth area. Then we'll be shifting to more of a master plan process where we'll be focusing our efforts on developing master plans for those undeveloped properties, as we spoke of earlier, and working with our transportation folks to do some frontage improvements at our undeveloped properties to address some gaps in our pedestrian infrastructure in the right-of-way. We can use our PIF dollars and REIT 2 funds to address some of those gaps, because they would be capital improvements that we would have to make when we develop the parks. And so we can make those improvements early on and find ways to serve the public that are low maintenance and cost less now than they would otherwise later when we come back to develop those properties. So we're going to develop frontage improvements at Cougar Creek Woods Community Park, at Foley Orchards Neighborhood Park, and at the Mackey property Neighborhood Park. Next slide, please. As I mentioned a minute ago, we're going to be developing a neighborhood park at the Minnehaha property. We're in the process of developing the first draft of the Minnehaha property neighborhood park master plan. We've engaged the public and numerous organizational stakeholders in an extensive public engagement process over the last year and a half. We're in the process of finalizing that draft master plan, and we hope to bring it back to council in 2025 with a new park name that meets the park naming policy for adoption. And this park will incorporate our typical neighborhood park amenities, a playground, picnic tables, a walking path, with the addition in this park's case of ADA parking and a little pullout along Northeast 17th Avenue, in recognition that there aren't very many sidewalks that actually connect this park to the neighborhoods that surround it. So this property is just north of Minnehaha Street on Northeast 17th Avenue. It's a really nice site. We're excited about being able to develop it. Next slide, please. So these two maps demonstrate where we are developing projects, either through the stewardship program or the new park program. Our prioritization process, which we can discuss further if you have questions about that process, help us ensure that we are distributing our capital dollars equitably across the urban growth area when it comes to new park capital projects, as well as in our outlying regional parks when it comes to some of our stewardship capital dollars. We will be doing some work in our regional parks on Louisville Park, Molten Falls, Frenchman's, and in excuse me, it's escaping me, but we are working in our regional parks to make improvements. So, next slide, please. This is the last comparison slide. This is a comparison of our acquisition programs, both the Legacy Lands acquisition programs. Kevin's here again to answer any questions that you might have about the Legacy Lands acquisition program, and then the Park Impact Fees acquisition program. You'll notice in this slide that there's some acquisition dollars in 2025. Those acquisition funds are more or less carryover dollars for a target property that we won't be closing on in 2024. And then out in 2028, we have some funds for acquisition for a couple of opportunity properties that are out on the horizon, but largely we won't be focusing on looking for properties to acquire. And then the final slide is a summary slide that shows our funding by source. We have real estate excise tax funds, Greater Clark Park District or MPD funds, park impact fees, general fund, conservation futures, and others, primarily grant funds, either Department of Commerce or Recreation and Conservation Office funds from the state. We have a few federal dollars, no federal dollars in our program. That's it.
Council, questions?
I have a question.
Go ahead, please, Karen.
First, I'd like to just say I appreciate that you are highlighting the stewardship capital planning. I think that is great. Also, I appreciate your emphasis on the accessible community additions, including things like that one flushable toilet that you mentioned, parking, creating accessibility to the water. All those things are very, very good, and thank you for that. I'd like to ask you, just because of my not catching it, when you may have explained it, it was probably back on about slide 4 or 5, I don't know just where, when you showed us the listing of line items that went into the planning budget, and you extracted a couple of those line items, put one in an appendix and so on. What happened with the funding for those items that you extracted? I think that was about back at, not that, maybe 5? Where is that list? Yeah. So the preventative maintenance and the equipment and vehicles.
Past our end slide, the preventative maintenance is in Appendix D. If you go past the last slide, Councilor Bowerman, I anticipated that this question was going to come up. So in the draft capital plan, in Appendix D, the preventative maintenance dollars, they didn't go away. They still exist. They've just always been O&M dollars that the planning and development team has administered, for lack of a better term. The way the preventative maintenance program has worked is we have a connection relationship with our operations staff. And if they have projects that they either don't have the capacity or the skill set to perform the work, then it's kicked over to the planning and development team. So we bid that work out through the legal bidding process, and we hire contractors to do that work. And as I mentioned previously, it's been in the capital plan for reference. And so we just moved it to Appendix D for reference and to clarify that it isn't capital.
And what is the source of those funds?
It's operations and maintenance, so it's GCPD dollars.
And how about the other item that was extracted from the capital plan list?
The equipment and vehicles funds have not been adopted in the budget for the last 3 years, so it was never funded. So those dollars haven't actually ever existed. They were approved in the plan, but they weren't approved in the budget, so they never existed.
So they are not being going to be requested either?
They were not requested this year, I believe, as a change request.
That would,
I'd-
after 4 years, that would seem to be something that would need to be in the near future.
So I believe that the issue, and forgive me for not being able to give you a more direct answer. As you know, we're between division managers, and our previous division manager had placed this in the capital plan because he was hoping to have the ability to buy some equipment outside of the fleet program to have a little bit of an emergency fund, and he was making change requests to have that money for buying blowers and wood chippers and those sorts of things, and the change request was never advanced, for lack of a better term, and so we just removed it through conversations with our interim manager, division manager, and
If I could, David, I'll just jump in. Ken Lader, Public Works Director. So as David pointed out, we are transitioning to a new division manager. And if council, if those of you that are here have a few minutes after our work session, we'd love to introduce you to Ross Hoover, who's in the room here with us, but we haven't put him on the spot since this is his second day with us. But to answer your question, Counselor, those equipment needs are ones that we'll be looking at with Ross in the future, and would certainly include in a future change request with Kathleen. And I don't have our change requests in front of me right now, but I think David's right that we didn't address that in this year's request for budget. So, but we will be looking at that and trying to make that right moving forward. So.
Well, my concern is that as the time rolls along, the dollar requested is likely to get larger, and that could be a problem in terms of accommodating it. So
Yeah,
I'd say the
absolutely.
sooner the better.
Understood, and we recognize that we do have a structural deficit issue on the O&M side for parks. Ross is excited and very enthusiastic to help us look at that over what's coming in the future, in the near future, as well as a few years out, to see what we can do to make those needs be met and to balance our budget and keep our parks maintained at a high level of service. So,
Does that conclude your questions, Karen?
Yes, it does.
Glenn, did you have questions?
Yes, I do. Thank you. I'd like to understand, so that this is a little bit of a struggle for me to follow. I feel like there's some information that was not supplied as part of the presentation. So I'm trying to understand the overall budget. Is the overall budget increasing? Is it decreasing? Because I know we have legacy lands mixed in. It seems like everything's kind of mixed in here. So what is the capital plan for parks? Not legacy land, but parks. Is it increasing? What is that budget doing versus last year?
I would, Counselor Young, I would say that it's in effect increasing a little bit because we've removed the preventative maintenance from the number from the capital plan, the adopted capital plan from last year. So it's effectively gone up by about $5 million. So if you look at this slide that was just put back on the screen, the 74, as you compare it to the 75 million, if you remove the 4.9 million in preventative maintenance from the adopted plan, the adopted and the 600,000 in equipment and vehicles from the adopted plan, that plan would go down below 70 million. And so there's a number of reasons for that. One of them is some legacy land acquisitions that have presented themselves over the course of the last year, increased construction costs on Curtin Creek and on Harmony Sports Complex, primarily. And then the two bridges that Justin mentioned in his presentation about major maintenance. One of them that we didn't anticipate at all when we started to do our bridge inventory a year and a half ago.
Okay. And so is funding increasing along with that?
We have capacity in our park impact fees to do the stewardship capital and the new park projects that we're proposing. And then in the major maintenance work, we've worked with Director Later on our REIT 2 usage to ensure that we're in line with the other public works divisions to be in line with an appropriate level of REIT 2 usage. So we feel confident that we can fund the projects that we have in our plan.
Okay, so that was kind of what I was leading to. I'm trying to understand what exactly is happening with REIT 2. I mean, if you are decreasing your reliance, does that not insinuate that your funding for the parks will be decreasing, or how is that being made up?
It's being made up by increasing the burn rate on the park impact fees. We're reducing the acquisition program to not acquiring property in the next 6 years, with a few exceptions, and then coming close to exhaustion of the current PIF balances on stewardship capital and new park capital development. That doesn't mean that the PIF balances won't continue to grow given the rate of development going on in the county. But we're planning a significant uptick in PIF usage.
Okay, 'cause I have concerns with this. Where is the REIT 2 funding going to that's being reduced?
Councilor Young, I can answer that. So we have attempted to balance. We haven't used REIT 2 funding for clean water in the up to this point. We are using some REIT 2 funding for clean water where it's applicable, and we try to balance that out against transportation and parks.
Okay, because I remember having that conversation when we're looking at clean water. I don't ever recall having a conversation saying that it would be coming at the cost of parks. So, I'm really concerned with this. This, to me, it looks like we've set our park system up for deficiency. I have grave concerns with, I understand, taking care of what we got, but on the flip side, if we're basically eliminating acquisition, we are setting ourselves up for major problems in the future, because it's only getting more and more expensive to purchase land, more and more difficult to find. So I guess what I'm saying is I'm surprised to hear that we are cutting funding from parks to fund clean water without really having a discussion on that.
I'll let Ken chime in, but Counselor, I did want to share, this is a very interactive and collaborative discussion with the finance team who part of them oversee the REIT funding. I don't believe there's any cuts being made to parks. We do not have sustainability in the maintenance and operations. We've always had a concern with purchasing a bunch of parks and then not being able to maintain them. So there has been a lot of intentional work with the finance team with regards to the parks budget because it was not sustainable, but I did not hear that we're going to be actually cutting any programs or dollars in parks. It's actually increasing a little bit.
Yeah, thank you, Kathleen. So I don't have the numbers in front of me, Counselor Young, but we can get that information for you. This, in my mind, is us balancing out the use of the REIT 2 with the 3 programs that can use it, where we hadn't taken advantage of that with the clean water program and should have been in the past if we had been aware of its availability. And I think the budget that David and his folks have laid out for our capital plan for parks reflects us utilizing the PIF dollars as best we can over the 6-year program. And as David pointed out, those will continue to come in. We do feel it's sustainable, but as Kathleen mentioned, we do have an ongoing issue with our sustainability and maintaining new facilities and new parks. So that's something that, as I mentioned, I wasn't joking. I think Ross Hoover is really excited to help us out in that role. Hopefully he's smiling back there. And he happens to have some particular expertise in that area from his former job, which we can talk about with council on a different time. But we are going to be actively looking at the parks revenue structure, the levy, making sure that we're positioned correctly and doing that work moving forward so that we can do both, so that we can continue to build new parks and meet the needs of the community as well as being able to maintain them. So.
Yeah. And if I could add also, counselors, you will see the 6-year forecast for all of our major funds next Wednesday during the annual budget work session. So you'll see the 6-year forecast for REIT and the other major funds. And this will also be a discussion with policy priorities come January regarding funding.
Yeah, okay, so I'll go ahead and end my questions. I do have more, so I would appreciate if maybe we could set up a time to kind of discuss some of these other things. I don't want to take up the time, but I
Okay,
feel
thanks
like
for that. When,
Chair,
and I
can I
don't want
finish,
the
please?
public to have a false impression from this meeting that suddenly we're cutting funding from parks. We're not doing that. I'm not sure where that came from. So I would encourage a one-on-one with staff.
Chair, can I
to
please
get up
finish
on this.
my comment?
Please, Glenn, but you've
Thank you.
really been drug
I
on.
have the
You've
floor. I
taken this
appreciate if you
meeting
allow me to finish.
off to left field here.
No, we're not. Okay, so I have concerns with this. I feel like we had this, how the budget is used. That's something that the departments that the executive branch is in control of. But when we're talking about where funding is going to what, that to me is a council level discussion that should have taken place earlier. So I'll just finish my comments there. I don't expect any response at this point. Thank you.
If I can share.
Yeah, go ahead, Kathleen,
this is
please.
why
because we don't want to have misinformation out there. And that's basically what we've gone through in the last 10 minutes. Go ahead, County Manager.
I appreciate your comments, Councilor Young, but that's the purpose of the work session is to get in front of council and have this discussion right now. And I would, and the chair, it's up to you, but I would also be inclined if there's other questions, I think it would be valuable for the whole council and staff and the community to hear those now. Cause I don't want to make sure, cause that's what we do when we get information from one counselor, how do I disseminate that to everybody else to have the same information?
Go ahead. Any other questions or comments?
Yes, Chair, I have a
Go ahead.
follow-up. The legacy lands acquisitions are built into the plan that is before us. How about other expenses relative to legacy lands? Are they buried within any of these other line items, such as maintenance or whatever?
Kevin Tyler's going to join us and answer that question.
For the record, Kevin Tyler, Lands Division Manager in Public Works. And so the answer to that question is no. The operations and maintenance of legacy lands would fall under the Conservation Futures budget, and that's an operating budget, and it's adopted each year through the annual budget process. We're allowed to use 25% of the prior year levy for operations and maintenance of Conservation Futures properties. What you see here is just the acquisition of actual land or conservation easements, other things that are eligible under the program.
Thank you. I had hoped that that would be the case, but I wasn't sure given how the line items are structured there. So thank you.
Councillor Marshall.
Yes, thank you. I think parks are very important to the community. I think within our comprehensive planning and looking at the level of development and the compactness with which we are developing in the future. And so I'm wondering how the parks planning is incorporated into the comprehensive planning process in terms of making parks available to some of those areas that we'll be developing more compactly.
Councillor Marshall, that's a great question. We're actually working directly with the planning department on updating Chapter 7 of the comprehensive plan. Kevin and I have been working on the sort of first draft of Chapter 7 and talking about how we can address those issues in not only Chapter 7, but our next PROS plan, and how we can creatively address infill development and density by developing within our current urban growth area. As you know, we're frequently outbid on property in the urban growth area, and so one of the solutions might be the stewardship capital program. And in the case of Pacific Community Park, we're adding a ball field there and a soccer field there that was in the original master plan, but we're also adding pickleball courts to the property, and that's requiring us to go through a master plan update. And so we may be doing that on some of our community parks. Our neighborhood parks are a little bit more challenging because of their very specific programs, and adding amenities to our neighborhood parks is a little bit more challenging. Acquiring property in an urban area that's becoming more dense is going to be a big challenge. But we're working with planning more actively than we ever have on the comprehensive plan.
I'm happy to hear that, but I think the success of being able to develop in a more compact way, parks are a critical component of that, and the livability that goes along with that. And I think also parks could be included in whatever chapter is developed related to climate change and resiliency. So that's just a suggestion there. And I think, I've seen this with all parks programs. There's a struggle between acquiring and developing and maintaining. That will always be a struggle. So I'm glad to hear that we'll be bringing on and developing amenities for the properties that we have. But I also share Councillor Young's concern that if we're pausing on acquisition for 6 years, that just makes it all the more expensive and more difficult to acquire some of those properties in some of those areas that are developing right now. So it's a cautionary note. I want both.
So do I. Councillor Marshall, I think one of the pluses of revising our capital plan annually is that we get to revisit some of these decisions annually. And with the new division manager and some sense of urgency on solving some of these revenue issues, we may only be in this pause on acquisitions for a short period of time, and we may have a new set of wheels relatively quickly. That would be our hope. I mean, we're a planning and development department, so you take our name and you dissect it, and you know what we want to do. So, and we're all mission driven at the Parks Department, down to every last one of us. We're mission driven.
Good. I do have some questions related to the PIF. One of my constituents was talking, who uses Whipple Creek Park, has horses, the equine community, and as I understand the PIF, there are districts, and as development occurs, the funds are intended to be used in each of those districts. So Whipple Creek Park is outside of one of those districts, but it quite likely will be heavily used by the development that's occurring nearby. Is that something we could look at some point in the future to see? There's an equity question, I think, and I don't know I don't know the geographic boundaries of those districts, but more and more density is occurring out on the edge.
So earlier when I tripped over my tongue and I couldn't remember what property I was trying to relate to you, it was Whipple Creek Park. So I apologize. So one of our stewardship capital projects is Whipple Creek Park. It touches the PIF boundary, so it's considered to be contributing to the PIF boundary. We have an opinion that would make it eligible for PIF fund usage. And so in 2026, we've set aside some scoping money to develop a project scope. I've already developed a conceptual plan, rather a schematic plan, to make some parking lot improvements out there to clarify where automobiles should be parking, where equestrian tow vehicles should be parking. Then in 27, we have some money to do some actual design work. Unfortunately, we don't have money in the budget until 2030 to actually do some physical improvements out at the site, but there is money in this capital plan to actually make some improvements at Whipple Creek Park.
So
we met with the Executive Horse Council sometime in the third quarter to discuss some of their concerns, and we have incorporated some of their
Great.
comments.
Thanks for being responsive to that. Ken, did you want to say something?
I just wanted to clarify. I was asking David, when he says we have an opinion that because it touches the PIF boundary, that's a legal opinion, not just our thinking that's a good idea. So just wanted to clarify. So yeah.
It's a legal
Yeah.
opinion and a good idea.
It is legal. It is an opinion from our legal counsel.
Right. So if a park is touching one of those boundaries, it would be eligible for PIF dollars.
I apologize for not
That's
clarifying. It's legal.
fine. Good. I'm glad that we've got that.
The opinion actually is that if it's a community park and if it's within 3 miles of the boundary, because that's the service area, that it could be considered contributing.
Right. The other thing, as I've been thinking about the comp plan update and looking at the framework plan, which I don't know if you all look at the framework plan that was developed 30 years ago, but the objective was to have green spaces between the cities. Well, we failed in some areas, and it looks at this point with some of the preliminary maps that there's actually going to be some overlapping, not just meeting. I don't know that there was ever any kind of plan to try to figure out how we could accomplish that component of the framework plan. Have you all thought of that?
I'm not familiar with it, but I don't know. Kevin's shaking his head as well. So I don't know that we have.
Okay, it's hard to accomplish something if you don't have a plan. Okay, and then just finally, some of our constituents have raised the concern that we overall have a park deficit, and I don't know if there's a best practices or what's being compared here. But how do we rank it, in terms of meeting best practices for the population and access to parks?
So in the adopted pros plan, there's a level of service analysis, and we, depending on the park type, we do receive some, and there are letter grades in the pros plan, and depending on the PIF district, we range from good to really bad. It boils down to available property in a lot of cases, and that neighborhood parks serve about a half a mile boundary or half a mile service area, and community parks serve a 3 mile service area. And so in some cases, our PIF districts are very urbanized, and the available land just isn't there.
And I guess I have just one more question. Maybe it's just a comment related to Heritage Farm. I just suggest whatever steps you take moving forward with Heritage Farm, that you really bring in the historical museum and the historical commission. It's a designated site. There's the cemetery there. I think there's uncertainty about. I think there's a lot of serious looking at that before any ground gets moved. So I would just encourage you to bring them in very early in any kind of planning process. And I think there's opportunities for funding too, if there's a collaboration that could be developed with the Historical Museum.
Just quickly, it seems like we're meeting with them quarterly right now. We have a really good, we're connected really well with them, and we have a really good rapport, and we're getting really good feedback from them on just about everything that we're doing out there. It's been great.
Thanks for that.
Couple comments. So first, as to REIT, and that what rankled me was that there's so much history to the misuse of REIT, and it took years for us to straighten that out with the finance team. And so I didn't want that to enter into this discussion today, because it's a totally different discussion. I just want to affirm that everything that was just said points to this balance that I think Councilor Marshall articulated so well, of acquisition and then operation of maintenance of what you have. And there's a lot of misperception out there that we're not funding our parks because of some of the problems we have in our parks. I absolutely think you are on the right path by slowing down acquisitions right now. We are spread way too thin, and I've been seeing that for years. Acquisition. We've got 4,000 acres at Camp Bonneville that we're not doing much with. No trails, no camping, no equestrian use. Heritage Farm. You talk about, well, let's bring in the museum into the discussion, and as we plan. We've had now 2 10-year plans for Heritage Farm that we haven't carried out yet. The beginning of my tenure here, one of my first trips, and I've said it many times, was to Heritage Farm with my mom. We were going to walk around Heritage Farm, a gem for the county, and 6-foot chain link fence with barbed wire on it and a cipher lock. I couldn't get into the property. I couldn't get in the building. The Washington State University Extension controlled the lock. And it's just like, great. Well, this is a great community park that no one can get into. It's still that way. Yeah, I know finally we're getting on some of the briefing slides that, well, we're going to have a trail. So all of that goes to this issue of we're not managing what we have. We get complaints from people that buy a park pass. Hey, I can't get in or out on a busy day because the egress and ingress is so limited for cars. I've already paid my fee. I've paid my annual fee. I can't get into the park or I can't get out. So yeah, we've got to double down and refocus on basics on how we manage our parks, even those that are unimproved. So I'm hopeful that with some of the new reorganization, we can focus on that. And oh, by the way, we just bought into an airport. I can't wait to see how that turns out. You know, we need to be careful about what we're doing in our acquisitions. And I think we can do a much better job of using the funding streams that we have to properly maintain parks at their highest level, so people can come and go, especially on those days when it's really hot and people want to use it. So I really appreciate this presentation you've done. I think you're absolutely on the right track here. Before you start another round of acquisitions, or maybe we can develop Camp Bonneville into the glory that it can be, I think. You know, and we have so many camp parks too. I didn't mention, you know, Camp Curry's one. We just tore down the residence at the Lacamas Park last year or so. We've got a lot of failing infrastructure, and certainly Camp Bonneville is a good example of that. You know, from septic system to potable water to buildings that are they're just going to fall down eventually. So we have a lot to do with what we already have. So I think that is where your focus should be right now. Take a knee and let's get on the operation and maintenance side and really focus on that and slow down the acquisitions until we're doing the best we can. The last point I want to make is it's always occasionally discussed. We've got a number of parks, regional parks, county parks that are fully within city limits and really would be best transitioned to city governance and to get it off your back. So we haven't talked much about that recently. We have a few years ago, we talked about the 2 parks programs that we share with the cities, and there needs to be more of a transition moving forward. That's something I think you should give some emphasis to have Vancouver take over more of the parks or a battleground that we are operating and I think somewhat beyond our capacity or limited capacity. Kathleen, did you want to comment on that? I saw you heartily shaking your
Yeah.
head. So
We have definitely had that discussion before, and I did discuss that with the city manager, the prior city manager at the city of Vancouver, to see because historically, well before my time, parks used to be a joint function between the city and the county, and it's separated. But yes, from my perspective, it makes sense that if it's within their incorporated areas, that we should look at a transition plan.
And then finally, Harmony. Oh my gosh, because of rising costs, we only paved half of it, or I'm not sure how much of the parking lot we finally did, but it would be good as a last thing on our parks plans, keeping up with operation and maintenance and capital program to finish the program or projects that we had come up with a few years ago. I mean, I really look forward to the traffic light and the city not putting a street through Harmony and paving that parking lot. I mean, there's lots of examples of that throughout the county and the park system. So anyway, great. I appreciate the presentation. I think you're on the right track. Good luck to you, sir. I know the council is going to be interested in talking to you in the future. Any last comments, Ken?
I just wanted to thank you, Chair, for your comments. I appreciate each of those, and thank you, Council, for your questions today. So,
Okay, so I think that does conclude this work session. We'll be back at 1 for council time. We stand adjourned.